For part 3 of our dynamic processors back to basics series, we're gonna look at the expander. So by now you've seen the limiter and you've seen the compressor. The expander I kept last because with the strong notions that we talked about in the first 2 episodes, this is gonna be way easier than it would be if you were to just face it, firsthand. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna take our compressor, move it up, bypass it, we have nothing to do here in the cyan colored, and we're just gonna concentrate on the expander, which is our yellow line. So, gonna reset the gain. And what is the role of an expander? So I'm gonna use the compressor to hopefully clarify things in a quicker way, right? More quickly. Compressors take a threshold and say anything that passes this threshold going up, so anything that is louder than the threshold level is gonna get compressed. So I'm gonna turn down things that are above the threshold, right? I'm gonna repeat that. Compressors attenuate anything that is over the threshold, above the threshold. Expanders attenuate signals that are below the threshold. So both compressors and expanders attenuate. That is how it is. They make different expanders. I know you're thinking about upwards expanders. They make whatever, upwards compressors. They make all sorts of plugins and devices these days. But both compressors and expanders attenuate signals. The difference is compressors attenuate signals that are above the threshold. Expanders attenuate the signals that are below the threshold. So we learned to use a compressor to say anything that is louder than this, you push down and compress, and then we move that new compressed dynamic level to what we like or need. Expanders take things that are below the threshold, so the quieter part, because it's the, of the two, the quieter part of your spectrum in terms of, dynamics, and make it even quieter. Why would we do that? Well, in a sense, now this part of the explanation becomes easier because the quieter parts, sometimes we don't want. For example, we want the loud snare sound. That's why we put the microphone so close to it. But we don't want all of the other parts, like the resonances in the kick, the cymbals, the singer singing maybe a couple feet from the snare, right? We don't want that. So by making the part of the dynamics that are below the threshold, so by making the quieter parts even more quiet, we enhance the dynamic range because we expand the dynamic range. We don't compress it, hence the name expanders. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make the attack super fast again, and I'm going to keep the release in auto. Let's just forget about envelopes for a second. If we're below the threshold, we expand. And the way we let go, we let the plugin decide. Again, I'm using Signum Audio Sky Dynamics. It's great. It looks great as well for explaining it. It also sounds fantastic. What I want to do is I want to listen to the snare in its just bypass state and just try and get all of the bleeding away. So I'm gonna try and find a yellow line position that is between the snare hit. I want the snare hits to be higher than the yellow line, the horizontal one, and I want the non-snare hits, everything else, to be below. Then I'm gonna take the ratio, which is a 1:1, so it's doing nothing, it's just linearly y equals x. And I'm gonna start increasing the ratio, and you'll notice what the curve does. It's gonna do a different movement than the compressor did. And we're gonna, here, if I said it right, all of the background information, all of the little noises and resonances of the drum kit. This is a real drum kit played by a real drummer in a real room. We're gonna hear them slowly disappear, right? So let's try this. Okay, so some hits are not that loud, so there's not a lot of hits going past that. I'm gonna zoom in so it's kind of easier. I'm gonna keep it here. I think it's fine. Maybe I'm gonna move it slightly. Now all of the play is on the ratio knob. Look what the ratio does. Ooh, okay. So it's making the quieter parts become quieter faster, right? It's expanding the dynamic range. It's gonna be super easy because you're confused right now, I know, once we hear it. So I'm gonna play the snare and then I'm gonna increase the ratio. Aha, you heard it. There's a little bit of a kick, hit. There's definitely hi-hat, which is my friend now because it makes the explanation so much easier. And the hi-hat is almost disappearing. And because this is a good dynamic processor, the release mode on auto is basically all we need to have. It's just cleaning things up in a nice way. So we just hear the snare and we hear less of what is not a snare, right? So that's really, really nice. And I'm gonna try and move it around just to play with it. Obviously the attack I wanna be really fast on because by the time the sounds comes in, I want the expander to let go of what it's doing, effectively not expanding. So I'm gonna play with the attack now, I think, just so you get an idea of what would happen if we had, I don't know, 30 milliseconds, right? Something that covers the whole transient of the first smack hit. So as you can see, the attack is not letting go of the expanded part fast enough to say, wow, there's a fast hit, please reset, because we have 52 milliseconds and the first part of the snare happens in probably 20, 16, 24, whatever, right? So it's almost useless to have something like this, but on slow transients, it actually avoids a lot of artifacts and weird behavior. So it's not useless by all means. If you have a string section and want to kind of help the strings to gain back a little bit more air and dynamics, like a very light ratio and some attack and release played right will make the section feel as if it is more dynamic than it was. So expanded effectively. So this is quite nice, and we're pretty much done. You thought this was the hardest one, right? I'm gonna try and make the attack back to 0. I'm gonna take the release and go like 100. And I'm gonna make the ratio 30:1. So let's hear what happens to this crazy thing. I'm gonna make this linear, and let's see where we are. So 30:1 with 0 attack milliseconds and 5 milliseconds release, almost like we dropped the volume on it. And again, that's why I can do this now, because you heard it right the first time. If we were to just play randomly, people would be like, what is an expander doing here? There's no useful outcome I can even fathom to imagine through this. Because we're so fast attacking and releasing at 30:1, we're sometimes crossing the threshold too much, sometimes not. It just doesn't work. We either get full expansion or nothing, so, right? But the way I said it before, I'm gonna do it again, kind of worked. We lost that, initial burst of the hi-hats and kicks, and we just concentrated on the snare. So I'm gonna try and redo it, but with the manual release now. As you can see, it works because when I bypassed it, wow, there's a lot of information there. This is a 30-to-1. The issue is the verse snare has a quieter vibe. So if I were to expand this in a more sophisticated way, I might want to be super transparent and duplicate the chorus and verse snares, or automate the threshold so that I always follow the difference point. There is a split point, sort of like a pivot, that changes. It's a little bit quieter, lower on the verses, but it's still there. And in that pivot, if I set it right, we have the snare higher than that on top, and the yellow line divides good snare from bleeding. On the chorus, it's exactly the same, but because the drummer's playing louder, the pivot moves up. So automating thresholds on snares or on expanders in general is a good idea, and it takes a little bit, but not that much, and it makes the tracks fall into place nicely, especially when you have a hi-hat that is not like this, because this I really like. I think the snare sounds good, the hi-hat sounds in place, a little bit distant, but sometimes you have tons of hi-hat and a little bit of snare, so you gotta play all of your trick cards, right? So let's try these again, and let me try a spot where it fits, at least in the chorus first part. So I didn't work in the verse, as I said, because we're louder, but in the choruses, it's insane. I mean, 30-to-1, I would never do that. Some expanders also have a maximum level. This one doesn't, in the sense that you can limit the expansion action. So you can tell it, you can get my signal 60 dBs lower, but the range must not exceed that. So once you've done a -6 expansion, you stay at -6. I don't want you to do more than that. This is nice because you can tell the track to have the snare where it was and just make the hi-hats 60 dBs lower, which is half of where it were, or like 12, 4 times, whatever, right? In this case, you don't have range, but I think you don't have range, I'm pretty sure. And you can play it with the ratio. So you don't always need range. Actually, by playing with the ratio, you'll hear I'm bringing the hi-hat bleeding back up. So I'm gonna start from 30, going backwards. So, as you noticed, we played the whole game, the match, on 1.1 to 1 to 1.8 to 1. And that's always the case. People don't understand this, and they come from compression action behavior, and they say, well, I'm going to go 4 to 1, 6 to 1, 8 to 1. It might be true and maybe valid for voiceovers, but honestly not even that. If you have a good silent room, 1.8 to 1 is a lot for expanders. So in this case, you noticed, look at this knob, right? It's a virtual sort of pie, colored pie thing. Look how much of the real estate space on the knob is dedicated to 1, 2, 2. So up until I reached 12 o'clock, I've only gone from 1 to 2 to 1, right? But look what happens if I go all the way up, 30 to 1, right? So this is not a linear knob because the programmers know that the most I would want, or an engineer would want, is from 1 to 2. Then they might be interested in 2 to 4, 5, and then look how fast this thing reaches 30, right? That's because, it's a probably use case scenario. You don't do it all the time. So this covers all I would like you to concentrate on the theme and topic of expanders.